Here's a rather odd question. Would a moral God choose a prophet to be a moral example when that prophet engaged in a relationship that, if practiced by others, would put children in harm's way? Seems obvious to say no. But that's the problem we are talking about today. I'm definitely not the first person to discuss this. I actually think Michael Jones over at Inspiring Philosophy does a much better job at laying everything out. But the idea is this. The Quran sets Muhammad as a moral example in 33:21. This verse is used to establish the concept of the Sunnah, that a Muslim should follow the example of Muhammad. Now, there is some historical context here, which we can see established in the tafsirs, where the verse was given in context of a battle where Muhammad staved off his hunger pangs involving himself with the trenches. But it also goes on to explain how he is a model to emulate because of his moral character. When we examine this, and the idea of isma, where a prophet cannot commit major sins through their prophethood, this is where we start to see a problem. Muhammad cannot have committed great sins, and is a great moral example to follow, according to Islam. But let's put that to the side for the moment and discuss some basic science. Often, you'll hear the defense that girls just matured faster in the 7th century desert, and a 9-year-old was actually a grown woman. But peer-reviewed biology says the exact opposite. According to a 2016 study published in the Journal of Pediatric and Adolescent Gynecology, looking at historical maturation rates, the average age for the onset of puberty during the classical and medieval eras was around 14 years old, ranging between 12 and 15. So historically and scientifically, a 9-year-old girl was not biologically mature. She was a child. And the physical consequences of ignoring that biology are devastating. According to multiple studies, and I'll make sure everything is cited so you can read it for yourself, girls who are in these kinds of marriages are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop STDs, such as HIV. In a case-control study conducted on 200 donors with and without cervical cancer, with the mean age at marriage of 15 years, HPV was observed in 40% and 97% of the subjects in the control and the case groups, respectively. The recognized risk factors were polygamous husbands, high parity, substandard genital hygiene, and child marriage. Medical literature also shows girls in these marriages are reported to be 1.5 to 1.8 times more likely to face physical and sexual violence. We also see complications such as preeclampsia, sepsis, and hemorrhage expose young females under the age of 15 to the risk of mortality 5 times more than those married in their 20s. Additional studies demonstrate that young mothers are generally 2 to 5 times more at risk of maternal mortality compared to adult mothers. And a devastating risk highlighted in the study that I am reading is obstetric fistulas, where they note the risk in these young females is as high as 88%. I don't want to be too graphic, but the easiest way to explain what it is would be to say 2 wholes become 1. That's where I'll stop explaining the term. It's a terrible injury that nobody should suffer from, and girls in these marriages face a much greater risk from these injuries. This isn't to mention the mental well-being, possible harm to their own children, educational struggles, and financial. All are risks greatly increased under this factor. It should be easy to note that marrying and consummating with someone that is a child should never be seen as moral and should be seen as harmful. But that brings us back to Muhammad. Over and over again, through the Hadith and Sirah, we read about a marriage, the marriage of Muhammad and Aisha. What we learn is that Muhammad married a girl who was 6. The marriage was consummated when she was 9, and according to the Quran, he was a moral pattern of conduct, which means his marriages cannot be seen as immoral. And because he's the pattern of conduct, we now have countries using his marriage to justify similar marriages, which actively harms the children involved. Now, a moral and omniscient God would have nipped this in the bud, but instead, he set this man as a prophet and a moral standard to follow. So now we have nations making laws for how to handle fistulas in children because their bodies weren't able to handle their husbands. If the God of Islam was a moral being, if he knows all things, you would not expect him to permit the marriage that set the standard. But it gets even worse, because he didn't simply permit it, he supposedly guided Muhammad to marry her at that age, showing her to him in a dream. So it seems to be that not only does the God of Islam permit the behavior, but he's the one who authored his pattern of conduct to set this standard. The standard where many children are now at greater risk and are facing great harm on a daily basis. If that's God you want to worship, all I can do is pray for you. As for me, I prefer my moral standard to be our Lord and God, Jesus Christ. Anyways, God bless you.